Hey, what's up? Andrew Kramer here, and welcome to another very exciting tutorial for our new plugin Element 3D. And we're going to be taking a look at animating inside of Element. So there's a lot of cool ways to animate, from the basics up to the advanced animation engine. So it's going to be a lot of fun, and hopefully you guys will understand how this plugin works, and we'll just take it project by project. So before we go on though, let me just give everyone who hasn't seen the plugin a quick overview of how it works, and then we'll dive right in. Let's take a look at how this plugin works. Basically, it's a particle array system that uses real 3D objects. So you can see I'm flying around real 3D geometry with textures, and I can move around the AE lighting, make some cool adjustments, and it's all done right inside of After Effects. Plus, it uses our fast OpenGL renderer that we custom built for this plugin. So you can see this is 720p. So the way it works is Element has its own scene setup. We've built our own custom interface. It allows you to import 3D models, OBJ, and Cinema 4D files. This is just a little preview that allows us to see what things look like. We can preview our models right inside of here. We can adjust our materials. So we have texture mapping, we have reflection, refraction mapping, we have an environment control here. And this is really nice for being able to change the look of the reflections and your scene. And we also have a preset material library that allows you to basically get started and just, apply materials to different objects. And you can, of course, go in and edit those settings as well. Go ahead and close out, cancel this. Now, let's talk about the basic array settings. So each group is made up of a particle replicator, a particle look, and the utility to allow you to copy, paste, and reset each group. So the particle look, we can control the size and rotation of the particles, etc., some random rotation as well. And then we have the particle replicator, which allows you to turn up the particle amount. You can also change the shape of the replicator. So in this case, we're just using a sphere. There's also some primitive shapes like this ring. Not to mention, you can use an actual 3D object as the array. So I can help maybe visualize that. If I were to go to the output here, change the polygon mode to point cloud, we can actually see what each vertex looks like. And so what would happen is particles would be emitted at each point. So kind of a cool thing. And this mode can actually be rendered. So you could do some really cool stuff with this point cloud mode. And while we're here, we can actually change this to wireframe mode. So you could do some really cool looking stuff. It's got the fog, so it's very interesting. You can set it to be a flat color. So if you don't want the wireframe to be shaded like this, you could do some really cool stuff. But this is already a very interesting look that you could build upon. So let's switch that back to normal. It's getting a little crazy. Let's switch this back to a sphere, and let's talk a little bit more about animating a group. Now keep in mind, all of these properties are animatable. So I can take the scale and maybe turn it down to 0 and do some kind of animation where everything grows out. We can even go to the particle look. Let's keyframe the rotation random. So if I set a keyframe, go to the beginning here, maybe turn that off and set the orientation to fixed, what's going to happen is they're going to sort of explode out of a single object. So something cool about that. There's also some random options like surface offset and scatter that allows you just to do some interesting things with the particles when you have a lot of them. So that's the basics of animating each of the groups. All right, so let's move on to some more advanced animation capabilities. All right, let's take a look at animating some moving parts like this. So we have a gun that's shooting, and then we have the shell casing popping out. And how can we animate something like this? Well, let me show you. So I want you to pay attention, okay? Listen, hey, pay attention. Pay attention. No. Here we are looking at this gun model, and let's take a look at animating the gun. So I'm going to jump inside the scene setup, and I've got the gun already in my scene. So here it is over here, 45mm handgun. And by the way, it's part of the projectile weapons pack that's going to be available. Now, the cool thing about this model is that the inside of the pieces are actually created, meaning if I shut off some of these materials, we can actually see the inside of the gun, and enough of the parts are here that will allow us to animate. So we'll shut this back on. Now, what are these four materials? Well, basically, these are the materials that have been assigned inside of a 3D program. So we've taken each of the different parts, like the trigger and the slide, and we've separated them by material. An element automatically recognizes them. So what's nice about that is it allows us to separate parts of a model so that we can animate them individually. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to shut off the slide, and then I'm going to duplicate the model. Then I'm going to shut everything else off on this model except the slide. So we have the slide on the top, and we have the gun on the bottom. Now, what I need to do is assign the slide, this part, to group number 2. So we'll click on group 2, and then we'll uncheck group 1. So now if I hit OK, the model looks exactly the same. There's no change really, except now if I go to group 2, where there wasn't anything before, now I can actually animate that top piece independently from the other piece. So that's basically the answer. We can go in here, we can animate this piece, and now we've got our animation. So very, very cool, very fast, and we can do up to 5 different parts using this method. We could come back inside here, and I've got this shell casing that's inside of this demo model. This is also part of the projectile weapons pack. And I can say put this on channel 3, hit OK. Now it's a separate model, so it's going to come in at the normalized size. So all objects get normalized to about the same size. And then we can just go to the particle look, size it down, and move it around, animate it. We could connect it to a null object and basically just have it shooting out. All right, so this is one way to be able to animate multiple parts of a single object. But let's keep going and take a look at some even more advanced examples. All right, let's take a look at some visual effects examples. So here I have this background image of some helicopters, and I thought, well, I want to add my own helicopter. So I did. This helicopter is being rendered inside of the Element render engine, and it looks pretty dang good. So the way it's been set up is I've imported it, and I just have 3 lights. So I have a fill light, I have the sunlight, and then I just have an ambient light, and it's looking really, really good. So if I shut the motion blur off here, we can take a look at how this is set up. So you can see the propeller blades are rotating. So I guess maybe I need to keep the motion blur on. We can see the propeller blades are rotating, and the object is also being able to be moved around. Now remember, Element only allows you to import static 3D objects. So all of the rigging for the helicopter has been done right inside of Element. So let's take a look at that right now. So we've got this helicopter, it's fully 3-dimensional, and we even have a couple of little pilots in there. I saw the pilots in the back, you could kind of see them a little bit, so I just threw in some pilots really fast. All right, let's take a look at how it's set up. So we'll jump into the scene here. We've got this Black Hawk helicopter, and you'll see that it's 100,000 polygons, and it doesn't seem to slow down a bit. Now, keep in mind that this is a high-quality model, and a lot of work was put into this. But what this shows is that Element can handle this many polygons and some high-resolution textures. So it's definitely capable of doing some good-looking stuff. Now, this particular model is not assigned to any group. It just happens to be all together. What I've actually done is similar to the gun example, is I've taken it and broken it into parts. So the Black Hawk body is on group 1, the rear propeller is on group number 2, and the top is on group 3. And then there's just a pilot helmet that's on group 5, and I'll show you how that's set up as well. So I've basically broken each of the pieces up, and then using the different groups, let's see here, I've added some simple expressions to animate them over time. So little time times a here, I can just delete that really quick, and we can see this basically animates that, and this one animates the top rotor. So very cool, and it's all rigged, but it's also rotating around. So if we look at the gun example really quick, watch what happens when I try to rotate one of the groups. The pieces don't stay together. So how did we solve this? Well, we have a world transform. The world transform takes all of the groups and allows you to move them around however you want. So in this case, we can move all of the propeller animation, so it's perfectly animating, and we can move this whole thing around. We can animate it banking and rotating and diving into the ocean or whatever we want to do. It's fast, and it's a really simple system. Now, what's really cool about it is that, let's say on one of the groups we put a building that we wanted it to crash into. Well, we can do an exclude group. So we could say exclude group 5 that might have a building, and that way only the parts of the helicopter will actually move together. So really handy feature. We hope you guys like that one. Lastly, let's just take a look at the pilots here. So they're on group 5 here. So what I did is I just set the replicator to a 3D grid, and it's set to 2 people. So we could set it to 3 people, and now we've got 3 people in the cabin. Maybe we set it up to like 6 people. We've got 6 pilots in there, or 1 pilot and 5 co-pilots. Sounds like a plan. All right, we've got a little bit of time, so let's take a look at this watch example, and just disregard that horrible joke. This is a cool looking model, and this was rendered inside of Element. Now, I know what you're thinking. That's a really cool looking watch, but I'd really like to see inside of it. All right, so this was created in Element. All right, so in this example, we're going to talk about 3D object dispersion, or being able to disassemble a 3D object. So we'll come over here to this watch comp, and I'll just go and purge all, so that we can actually see how fast this renders. So if I just take my camera, move it around, I would say it renders pretty fast. And this is 720p again, and I can scrub through the video and we can see the animation. So the rendering is still very fast even with this on. Now, how does it work? Basically, if you have a 3D object that's made up of multiple pieces like these gears, Element will automatically create particles out of those pieces and allow you to distribute them in 3D space. So let's take a look at how that's set up. So we'll jump inside of Element. All right, so here we have our luxury watch, and I've shut off parts of the model so that I can assign just the wrist part of the watch to group 2 and the top part with all of the gears to group 1. And that way I can animate them independently. Now remember, all of these inside pieces are all separate individual parts. So if we take a look at Cinema 4D, you can see all of these different pieces are separate objects. So what's going on here is the top piece is on group 2 and the pieces are on group 1. Let's go and hit OK. All right, so now the question is, how do we animate these multiple pieces inside of Element? Well, let me just delete the keyframes, and we can kind of start from scratch. So the top piece is here on group number 1. So what I'm going to do is go into the particle look, and there's a folder called multi-object. So this is probably one of my favorite features. So if we enable this, we have a bunch of independent settings specifically for the multi-object. So we can do things like scatter the pieces. We can turn up the random rotation. We can even do a random size on each of the pieces, which can be really cool. Now, in this case, we might do something similar to a scatter, but on a single axis. So I can, instead of scattering everywhere, we can scatter just on the y-axis. So that's kind of cool. Now, a scatter is like a random movement, but a displace is more of a spatial movement. So if we go to the displace XYZ and bring that up, we're going to go ahead and animate the Y amount. So if we turn that on and move forward a few seconds, and let's turn the displacement up. Now it's going out of the frame. We can go ahead and zoom out to see what that's looking like. And it's looking good. Now it's moving a little bit too much, so we need to move it back down, which is easy. We can just keyframe the position and just slide it back down. So as we increase the displacement amount, we just need to move its position back down to where it's coming out of. So now we go back to our main view, we can see it jumping out, and then we can animate it going back down. And what's great about this is that we're only using about 4 keyframes for this whole entire animation. So this is great for visualizing things like, say you have an engine part or some product that needs to be broken up into pieces so you can see what's inside of it. This will work really well. All right, now we've done all this cool stuff and we haven't even got to the animation engine yet. So let's go and move on to that. But seriously, take a moment to think about everything that you could do. All right, the wait is finally over. Let's take a look at the animation engine. Now, I will tell you, it's not a physics simulator, but what it is an intelligent way to animate all of your particles. So let's take a look at a quick example here. All right, so what's happening here is the particles are animating from one group to another group. So the settings in group 1 are being interpolated into the settings of group 2, and that includes the material settings as well. So this has a lot of implications. What we can do is go into each one of these groups and make edits and changes, and it will update for the entire animation. So for example, I could go to group 1, maybe to the rotation, add some, say, random rotation, play this back, and there we have it. And maybe for group 2, I could turn the size random off and the surface offset off as well. Let's see, turn that up a little bit. And let's see what that looks like. Now the coolest thing about this is that this entire system is being animated with 2 keyframes. So there's a percentage from 0 to 100%, and it's animating everything you see here. And the great thing is you still have full control over everything. So I can come in here and I can change the direction. So I can, move this around, and there we go, play the animation back. Not really waiting. The resolution's half. If I just solo this and go full screen, this is about how fast it renders. So it's still very, very fast, even though it's calculating all of that sort of interpolation. I have a little bit of a glow on it that's actually slowing it down the most. So we can move that around. We can also change the smoothness of the transition. So we can turn it up and make it a little bit softer, or we can turn it down and make it, really choppy. We can also turn up some randomness. So watch this. Turn up the randomness, and now it looks a little bit different. That's kind of cool. And then there's a bunch of other options like animation types, which we'll get into in a moment. And the best part of all, it's really easy to set up. All you have to do is go into your group, change the settings. So for example, let's do a ring and maybe turn the random rotation off. So check this out. You have a ring and it is animating into the other shape. So it doesn't really matter what shape it is, it'll just move into it. Here's another example of the animation engine being used in a little bit different way. We've got some light bulbs raising up and kind of a fun effect. And here's another slightly different one. So I've got this large box and I'm going to go into the scene setup. Now, the thing about this box is that it's pre-fractured. So Element doesn't do any fracturing, but you can do fracturing in 3D Max, Cinema 4D. You could do it in Blender for free. Just open your model up, run the script, export it, and bring it right back in. So check it out. If we go to the wireframe mode, we can see that the entire model is pre-fractured into all of these chunks. Now, usually you want your objects to be on one group, but in this case, I'm going to put it on group 1 and group 2 because I want to use the animation engine, so I'm going to hit OK. So if I jump into group 2 here and move the position around, we can see that we have two of the exact same objects on top of each other. Well, the way the animation engine works is that once it's enabled, it automatically hides one of the groups. So if we turn the animation amount on, move forward a few seconds, and turn it up to 100%, it's now interpolating between group 1 and group 2. So let's go up to group 2 and see what kind of effect we can make. Get ready for this. Turn on the multi-object. So now I have control over all of the individual pieces, and what I can do is scatter them around. So you can see it's starting to look like it's cracking across the surface. So right there, we've got some really cool possibilities. And we can come down now to the animation engine, play with the settings. So we can turn the smoothness down, and now we have a nice tight fracturing. We can maybe come up here and displace some of the pieces a bit. You know, create a really nice looking bit of destruction. We can even, let's say, watch this, we'll scatter it, rotate it, and let's move the position of the group, say, down. And so what we're going to see now is the pieces, if we smooth out the, we're going to see the pieces sort of falling down out of the frame, and we can even move that position down really far and almost cheat some type of gravity, some sort of wall that's crashing down or something like that. So we can see the pieces sort of breaking apart, which is really cool. But we can do something else. So let's turn the scatter amount down, and let's come down to the animation engine. And instead of doing a directional animation, so this is what's happening here, is the pieces are falling in sort of a directional pattern. But let's change it from directional to radial. And look what happens. Let me come up here. We've got ourselves almost like a destroying ground. And remember, this isn't physics. This is simply interpolation. But with a little bit of work and some clever animating, you could do some cool things like dragging this down to kind of fake a bit of gravity, even turning up the rotation random so that the ground really starts to crumble. It could look really, really cool. All right, so here's what that might look like with some motion blur. We can even change the radial direction to be inward. And so now the sides will start falling off first. All right, let's take a look at this example using another pre-fractured object. So in this case, we're using a pre-fractured sphere. Now I can show you what that looks like through the wireframe here. Basically just a bunch of pieces in here, and it's like higher density down here. Now it's animating between the dark ball and the green ball. So what we can do is go to group 2 and start playing around with the settings. So multi-object, we could turn the displacement amount up and make those pieces really break off a little bit more dramatically. We could even turn the size of the multi-object pieces down to 0, and it almost looks like the pieces are chipping away. Now I'm noticing a problem. I'm not seeing that bright green anymore, and I really like that. So how can I make my material blend a little bit sooner? Well, what we can do is go to the animation engine. Now there's not enough time to really get into this, but we have this time delay. And what we can do is take the material duration and change it from 100% to something like 40%. What that will do is make it so the material is done blending at 40% instead of 100%. So that way it happens faster. So we can move it over, and now look at this animation. Pieces breaking off. We can even slow this animation down. And again, this is all being animated with 2 keyframes. Maybe turn the motion blur on here. What I'm going to do is I want to turn up that displacement. I want to make these pieces really go flying. And instead of it being so sharp, I'm going to turn up, let's turn the randomness down. And I'm going to turn up the smoothness a little bit. So it'll be faster if you shut the motion blur off. So there's cool. So take a look at this. All right, well, this is pretty amazing. I'm not sure, there's much else to say after looking at this. There's just so many possibilities. We've got this last example where we can see pieces getting sort of sucked into the middle. And what's cool about this is I'm using the radial mode. So it's pulling the pieces in from the inside, which is really fascinating. Anyways, this is how the element animation system works, and I hope you guys like it. All right, well, we're going to be posting some more in-depth tutorials to the Element help section, so those will be available online to everyone. And also, we got a little bit of new information on some bundles. So we've got the Element plugin, we've got the Pro shaders, which are the 200 pre-made materials, and then we've also got the Motion Design Pack, which has a bunch of objects and abstract stuff ready for you to use, including a bunch of pre-fractured objects like glass and things that you can use with the multi-object system. We've got the Pro bundle with the Pro shaders, and then the 3D design bundle, which includes all 3 of those. So that's great for motion graphics and things. Now, we just announced our new 3D model packs, and they include anywhere from 40 to 60 models per pack. And if you're looking to get the complete bundle, we have a great discount on that, $495, and you're saving $350. So you're pretty much getting every pack for $50, and it's just a really good deal. We've been working on this for quite a while, and we're really proud and really excited to finally get it out there. So my name is Andrew Kramer, and we will see you next time.